All right, welcome to the Dirty Gavel. I'm Brad Cohen, and we are going to be discussing what happened to Charlie Kirk recently. Obviously, it was a tragedy that happened. No one expected it, really. It was just something that was a horrible, horrible incident where Charlie Kirk was assassinated during a college question and answer. And he was assassinated, as far as we know, he's assassinated because of his political views. We're going to be talking about some of the texts. You know, Tyler Robinson, who is the alleged assassin here, had a recent court hearing. And what's important is in these texts is what is said, what kind of admission is in these texts. And a lot of attention has been paid to these texts regarding whether or not it's even Tyler Robinson saying these things. So there are a lot of people online that are saying, maybe that's not Tyler Robinson. It's not the way that he would say things. Maybe it's not his roommate that was talking back. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there and conspiracy theories about these texts. So what we did was we ran it through a program to determine whether or not these texts were truthful. Now, it doesn't tell you whether or not Tyler Robinson actually made these texts. Obviously, the government/state will then come up with how they know these are texts from Tyler Robinson, and how they're going to do that is through pinpointing his phone. They're going to find out where he was at the time. They're going to probably try to coordinate that with any kind of audio or video they possibly have of Tyler Robinson and when he was making these texts. And obviously they also have his phone, so they'll be going into the data on his phone to confirm that these texts are actually from him.
What do you think the texts reveal about Robinson's state of mind, if anything?
Why I think these texts are so interesting and what they say about Robinson's state of mind, in my opinion, is a couple things. One is it seems like he's very nonchalant about what just happened. Allegedly, he just pulled the trigger and killed a person. And he's talking about, why kind of he did it, that he has to go back and grab his rifle, that he's worried about DNA. It's unusual how nonchalant the discussion is between him and his roommate. I found that to be unusual. But then again, someone who does this type of crime is usually an unusual person. This isn't someone that you would expect that would be follow the norms, especially the way that this crime was carried out.
Is it usual for them to admit it outright in something like a text thread?
So I've had many cases where people admit things in text that you wouldn't expect them to admit, especially where they're not really thinking. And this seems to be a case where the individual who fired the weapon wasn't really thinking of the consequences or thinking of how he or she was going to get away with this. There was, writing on the cartridges. There was fingerprints and DNA on the gun, so no gloves were used. There were imprints on the roof, allegedly, of palms and elbows and arms. There were certain things about getting away with the weapon, right? It was like it wasn't like a takedown weapon where it would break in half and you could stick it into a backpack. This was a full weapon that didn't break down. So he never thought about how he was going to get out of that situation carrying the firearm. And the way that he went into the situation, allegedly, of him limping to the area because he had the gun stuffed down his pants, it didn't seem like it was well thought out, which is unusual for this type of crime.
Regarding the texts, and based off your experience, are there any potential evidentiary issues in introducing those before the court?
So the only evidentiary issues that come about when you look at texts or establishing whether or not the individual texting is the individual that is the defendant in the case. So that usually is accomplished through looking at the phone, figuring out where the phone was through triangulation, knowing that that individual owns that phone was with that individual, coordinating it with photographs or video of where that individual was at the time they were making these texts. That's the only evidentiary issue. Other than that, there are texts or admissions of a defendant that are always allowed into court. They wouldn't run into a hearsay argument because he is the defendant. and having the roommates' responses would be the doctrine of completeness. So you'd want the roommates' responses because that's how his admissions would come in against him.
Obviously, a lot of people ran the text messages either through ChatGPT or other AI to see if they were deceptive or not. We put it through a special software that identifies truthfulness and the potential for deception. What are some of the language markers that the software came up with?
When we put it through Deceptio AI, which essentially looks at the language and decides whether or not there is deception in what is said, and it gives a score. So our AI came out with a truth score of 85%. And the reason for that was the lack of contractions that are used. You are, I am, I will, there is. It appears that numerous times that Robinson could have used a contraction but did not. And that shows that it's a more formal way of speaking. And that could be a deceptive marker. But if you look at this overall, and I've seen a lot of texting back and forth in many cases that I've had, and I'm not talking about you using AI, I'm just talking about the cases that I've had and the experience that I had. This type of language that's used, to me, seems very honest and truthful, the way that he's speaking, and about if he can grab his rifle, and then later on he says, my grandpa's rifle. And there's different things in here that would give way for me, just as a person reading it, that I feel that it is a truthful text. I don't see where this would be a made up text or something that someone was making up, and there would be no reason for someone to make it up unless you're a conspiracy theorist and you think that he's a patsy and that somehow someone else was texting his roommate, because the roommate's going to testify that she actually got these texts. And then we would have to argue that the texts were then sent somehow from his phone to her phone by someone else who was trying to set him up.
So how do they normally authenticate digital evidence like text messages in a court where you're trying to see if somebody actually sent those messages?
Yeah, so normally how we authenticate texts are through a couple different ways. Number one is the individual receiving the text could say, hey, this is how we normally talk to each other. Like where he says, okay, my love. Like if there's never a time where that individual calls that other individual my love, and it's never in Robinson's phone and it's never in the roommate's phone, then that would give rise to a question, well, is this really Robinson? Also, just a different kind of language that is used in the text itself. Number one is the roommate never calls into question. And I've had a case, I just had a recent case where someone had the defendant's phone and was texting from the defendant's phone, and the individual that he was texting wrote back like, hey, this is weird. You never talked to me like this, and knew that it was not the individual who was texting. And you see that quite often in a lot of cases where someone has died and the person trying to cover up the murder start texting people in the family or, friends saying, hey, I'm in Cabo and I'm doing great, hours after the death to try and cover up the death. And normally the person they're texting will be able to see, hey, this isn't the person. They never talked to me like that. So there's a lot of individual wording in this thing that in these texts that I think would give rise to that if it was fake.
But if the jury thinks the messages are real, is that basically game over for the defense?
I think this is one brick in the wall of guilt against Robinson. There is going to be an unbelievable amount of evidence against him from what I know. There's going to be DNA on the weapon. I'm sure they'll have fingerprints on some of the weapon. They might be DNA on the bullets that were not fired, the cartridges that were not fired. There's probably DNA or fingerprints. There's also going to be the texts. There's going to be the photos, the video. I think that where his phone is, triangulation of the phone to show that he was in the area at the time, there's going to be a mountain of evidence against him. I think it's going to be a very difficult case for any defense attorney to say that Robinson was not the shooter.
Could something like Deceptio be used in court more frequently, or AI software in general?
So it's interesting because I think AI itself is going to be starting to be used more frequently. I mean, obviously you have big goofy firms now that use AI to type some of their motions, and they get caught by federal courts and get cited for it. I mean, that's happened quite a few times in the past. I think that that's going to continue to happen because I think that a lot of lazy lawyers use AI to type their motions and then don't double check it. But as AI gets better, I think it's going to be used more frequently in determining a couple things. Number one is whether or not someone is telling the truth. I think it's going to replace lie detectors eventually. Now, knowing that lie detectors are not allowed into evidence currently because they're not considered scientific and they can be beaten, we don't know how AI is going to develop that and get more advanced to the point where someone won't be able to beat either an AI truth-telling machine or some sort of lie detector that also is analyzed by AI.
Could a prosecutor introduce something like that Deceptio AI report in court currently?
AI software itself that is giving different scores, truth scores or deception scores right now, would never be allowed in court currently because it's not proven to be scientific, number one. Number two is with a truth score of like 85%, how are you saying that it's truth or that it's false? So you're leaving an area open of 15% that it could be 15% false. So I don't see where in the near future an AI telling you the truth or saying that you're being deceptive is going to be allowed in as substantial evidence in a case. I think it might be considered by police officers where they're talking to someone or they're asking them questions and they're running it through AI real time. That may be used in the future. I don't see that not being used, but I don't think they could use that evidence then to bring it into court and say, oh, and by the way, he scored 85% in that he was deceptive or he was truthful.
You also ran the text messages through to Sheffer, which is another software. That's the one that identified aggression markers and Robinson's potential to show that level of aggression. Can you go over what that report says?
So the report that we ran it through to determine the aggressive nature of the language used showed him being in the 90.5 percentile of grievance, which is a precursor to radical behavior. So what we're looking at now is, and if this was going to be used by, let's say it was going to be used by the FBI, they could take texts before something happened and then, determine whether or not this grievance or this type of language would lead to radical behavior. So it's like that Tom Cruise movie, right? Where they're looking at the future and whether or not this person would commit a crime in the future. And what was that movie called? Minority Report. And, that's the scary thing, right? I mean, it certainly helps in determining who to look at, but not whether or not to arrest that person, just that this indicator is there for potential future violent behavior, which is interesting, right? So that's how AI is going to be used, I think, in the future by FBI, by the police, all these different things where you could take even texts that tweets or truths or whatever they are posting on Facebook, feed it through an AI and determine whether or not it has indicators for potential violent behavior. And that would put that person on a radar of the FBI or the local police.
So if AI could scan your social media, for example, for aggression markers, do you think law enforcement should be able to use that proactively?
It's a very sticky wicket. It's like a slippery slope that you go down in terms of how AI is going to be used in the future. And we came up against this with, if you notice, with drones. what's the limitation on it? We can use drones. And as these different things come up, these different technologies, glasses that you can read things on, I think Facebook just came out with new glasses that you can, translate word for word as someone's speaking. You can record them. You can see directions in your glasses, and then this type of software that's going to come about. It's very hard to limit it because it's kind of like, it's out there, right? So if it's not used to arrest someone, if it's used to whether or not there's an indication of potential violent behavior, whether or not they use it isn't the question. It's what they do with that information is really what you want to worry about. Because it's the same thing with cop cars now have license plate readers. They read every single license plate that goes by them. And then it pops up on your screen if the driver of the car has a suspended license or has a warrant. So it's not that they can or can't do that. It's what they do with that information next. So now they pull the car over, not even knowing if that driver is the actual owner of the car. And then it could turn out to be his wife, or, he loaned the car to someone. So it only becomes scary with what the police do with the information. If they start arresting people based on what they're saying, then it becomes very scary, because then you're a First Amendment violation. You get into a lot of things that become very scary. If I'm using this information to keep an eye on individuals, it is less scary, but it still becomes like 1984, where we are looking at people and what they're saying, and then watching what they do based on what they're saying, which, it pushes us back 50 years to, who you associate with. Are you a communist? Are you not a communist? The McCarthy era. So you get into a lot of discussions about those things.
This is obviously a very sensitive case. What role do you think the court of public opinion and social media will play in administering justice?
You always want to feel, when you have a high profile case, and I've had a lot, you always want to feel that the court of public opinion doesn't sway a judge one way or the other. It's usually unlikely that premise is true. I think that the court of public opinion always has a swaying effect on different decisions in different cases. Obviously, no judge wants to be the judge. Let's say it's a bond issue and it's a high profile case. No judge wants to be the judge that grants bond and then that individual does something else that's violent while they're out on bond. There's no reason for that judge in their mind to put themselves out like that for something that they don't need to grant. So often you see cases where if there's a bond issue, if there is a motion to suppress, if there's some issue that may come about, you often find judges, are swayed by the publicity of the case. Now you have the Mangione case in New York, and you have a judge that just dismissed some counts for terrorism, a state judge where there were state terrorism charges filed. I think the judge probably did the right thing in that case. And I think, in my opinion, he actually did the state a favor because they streamlined that case. To prove terrorism, you have to prove there was specific intent to do something in order to scare the public or to have an effect on the public. I think that would have been very hard to prove in that case. I think it's a very easy case to prove where Mangione, pulled up and had a gun on him and assassinated an individual in New York. I think it streamlines that case. It's an easier case to prove for the state without those terrorism charges. So I think by dismissing those terrorism charges, they actually did a favor to to the state on the Mangione case.
Going back to AI software being able to detect truthfulness in real time, if it does reach that capability, do you think that should apply to, for example, judges or politicians or influencers?
I can't ever see where, I think it's going to be very similar to a lie detector test, where I can't see ever the science backing up the reliability of saying someone is what they're saying is 100% reliable or 99% reliable in terms of deception or truth. if that ever came about, utilizing it in a trial setting, I think would still be very difficult because you're still relying on a machine. So like in any case, we have DUIs where people don't trust a breathalyzer. A lot of people just don't trust machines, and the voir dire question really is, does anyone have a car that's over 15 years old? And if someone raised their hand, would you bet me $300 that you'd go downstairs and you'd start that car, it'd run perfect, start perfect? Most people wouldn't bet you $300. If I handed you a lighter even, would you bet me $300 before you even tried it that lighter will light? You're relying on a machine. You're relying on a mechanism that not everyone has faith in. There are some people that do, but most people don't. And there's a very large growing population of America that is starting to feel less and less confident in machines, in videos, in audios, all these AI fakes. I mean, when I first saw that Charlie Kirk video, the minute I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I thought it could be AI. I was like, it's impossible. And then when I found out it was true, I mean, it's a disturbing video. It's a disturbing situation, but we have been so accustomed to seeing AI and deep fakes that you have to question everything that you see on social media because you don't know if it's real. And, there's a guy on social media right now. I think his name's Miles, and he does a deep fake of Tom Cruise where it's Tom Cruise's face but it's this guy Miles doing a Tom Cruise imitation, and it will blow your mind. It looks like Tom Cruise. It sounds like Tom Cruise. I mean, it's amazing what they're getting done with AI. And I think because of that, it's having the opposite effect on the population where people are becoming they're becoming individuals that believe less in social media, believe less in what they see on cases, on videos, on audio because of that. They're having less confidence in communications because of AI.
Do you think there's a subset of people that assumed the text messages were fake because of a distrust in social media or a distrust in media in general and the government?
I think there was always a niche of individuals that have distrust in the government and distrust in social media. I think over the years that has grown significantly because of the cases that have shown, prosecutors hiding things or the government doing things that weren't on the up and up or politicians getting caught doing things. And I think overall, the amount of individuals that distrust what they see on, the government puts out a video or the government puts out an audio, I think the amount of people that have distrust in the government has significantly grown because of those things, because of, things that they have shown or they don't feel are true, or they've shown that they've proven aren't true. We had this whole thing about Russiagate, right? And all these politicians are like, I've seen it. I know it. I know that there's Russiagate. And then it turns out there is no Russiagate. And it was a proven fact that there was no Russiagate. Or Hunter Biden's computer that they first came out and said, no, the FBI says it's not real. It's a deep fake by the Russians. And then all of a sudden it turns out, no, these are all real photos and this is a real computer. That leads more and more people to believe that, not everything the government says is true. You had texts between two FBI agents in Donald Trump's case, where these texts are going back and forth like, don't worry, if he wins, we have a backup plan. Those are things that give rise to distrust in the FBI or distrust in the government, because back in the day, no one would ever think of that. Like when I was growing up, no one would ever think that. It just wasn't something we ever came about in terms of like police misconduct or FBI or anything like that. We never would think that. And I think it has grown significantly over the years because of what has been discovered, because of technology, because of ways that we've done it. You know, there's this guy that goes around. I don't know the name of the group that he has, but he goes around and does undercover videos where he interviews people, and people are like, yeah, you know, that's a bullshit thing or whatever. And then he puts those videos on YouTube or whatever it is. And like that gives rise to distrust. You know, these people are getting caught saying things opposite of what they say on TV, gives rise to distrust in the population.
Do you think political polarization plays a role in that, or were people always that tense?
I do think that there is some truth to where there's very far right, very far left, that it does give rise to the distrust on both sides. But I think you find more people in the middle that are leaning towards distrust in general. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. I think there is a healthy dose of distrust in what we see or what we hear. And there's questions that arise from that. And I think that there's always a good side to that, right? You don't want people always just listening to what's on the news or what's said on video, what I say, what you say, what anyone says, and just taking it as the truth. You want people to question it. Now, that being said, you want them to do it in a open forum, in a discussion type way. Like the way that it's happening now is that people are getting more and more aggressive, like you saw with this Charlie Kirk assassination, because they don't like what someone's saying, instead of questioning what they're saying and arguing, you know, having a healthy debate about it. And you see less and less of that now.
Do you think the law will adapt to this form of digital evidence or AI manipulation? If so, how?
I certainly think the law is going to have to adapt to AI, to the possibilities of AI, because, you know, now you can make a defense surrounding whether or not something is true or false because of the AI. So it gives rise to the state now having to go the extra mile to prove that something is true, or to prove why this individual was here at the time that they were supposed to be here. So that gives rise to different technologies. Like I said, triangulation of the phone, different GPS coordinations of the phone, pictures that were taken have metadata that will show where the picture was taken, when it was taken, all those different things. The state is going to find themselves having to go deeper and deeper into those areas to actually prove that what they're presenting is real and that you can rely on what they're presenting.